So hi everybody and welcome back. This is the presentation of, as you can see, my brand new cast, resin cast I made for the Porsche 1973 R7. It was the Porsche used at Le Mans and in the Nürburgring of that years, And I think it was another car driven by Herbie Muller, that I like the cars that he had been driving during his career during the 70s. It was a very, very big champion from Switzerland. And so this is the cast, as you probably have seen from my social media. I made the body of what they call it was not exactly this version, what they call it the Mary Stewart. The Mary Stewart was the one used in Targa Flory with experimental fins over here. This was the definitive version used for Le Mans, and it was basically for the struggling they had during the 70s to find a downforce, reliable downforce on the driving of a 911. I mean, if you had the opportunity to drive one of these cars, even more if you are a racing pilot, always the problem with the 911 was that the engine unit, so all the weight of the car was behind the rear axle of the car. So every time it was required to have an incredibly high downforce, because the 911, the older version, of course, not the modern car. The modern car are like starships, so it's very, very different, and they are not racers, But the purpose for this car was always to try to compensate the difference of balancing of weight that you had in a race car. Usually when you build up a race car, one of the most easy trick to make a performance race car, it is to place the engine in the middle of the car. So the center base of the vehicle is in the center of the car, so you have no problem with the stability of the car. Instead, the 911, being a quite older program, remember that it was a car developed in the 60s, and they wanted to nickname her in the beginning 901, but the number 90 and another number was already used by Peugeot. So it was the French company that was used that, so they renamed it like 911, The very, very first one, Porsche, was the 901. Then they became 911, So to try to fix this issue even more in high speed, when they became quite complicated to be grounded, like the other cars, it was long before they started to invent any ground effect, any wing and so on. They start to do something like this, that you probably already have seen something like this in my previous realization. It was the R6 that I made, even used in Le Mans and by Viceroy, because they used it in 73 like a test car for this one. Then in 74 arrived in America with the Sunoco livery and the Viceroy car, Viceroy cigarettes, the tobacco company, and it was performing in Le Mans in the following year in 74. But the actual car used it with the Martini livery, and they never did the Martini livery for the R6. It was used anyway in 1973, so that they had a constant evolution for vehicles, in 73. And this was the car used and performing at Le Mans and at the long distance race in the Nürburgring, not the modern Nürburgring. It was the Nordschleife, so it was a really, really serious track, My cast is based on what I already did on the R6. So basically I made a modification of that previous body, because basically you have to work on something that is like the first version of the pre-bumper, they call them, version of the 911, and let's pick it up one. They are all the same, I am preparing the models here, the cast, because I have several orders. So every time I sell something outside and abroad, I want to check if the parts arriving to the guy is decent, So every time I have a quite of high level quality check about what I'm trying to sell, And as I was saying, this was a pre-bumper Porsche. It was still different from the RSR that you already seen in my channel. I made several models of the 74 RSR when they changed the position of the arrow, the arrow that in this model is here, in the following model became in the bumper here, was a different configuration, Basically they saved this part of the front fenders and then they cut the final part of the bonnet here. So it was simply a shortened version of this bumper, This was the 60s version, so it was based on the very, very early type of 911. And some modeler asked me how to deal with this part, and I wanted to add this on my mold because as you probably know, the only model existing in 1/24 scale of this type of pre-bumper models, it is the one made by Fujimi. Fujimi made a quite decent model, not so bad, but it was basically a model related only about the street version, and there is no way, honestly, no way to make from that street model something that resemble to the R5 that was the first version, what they call it the 911 RS version. It was the first one with the starting of the enlargement of the body. This vehicle is hugely enlarged compared to an RS R5. I mean, the R5 was still a car from 73, still developing, arriving to this final configuration, Remember that in 73, they start to develop the cars like the 936, like that vehicle, that they arrived lately in the 70s, and they were completely, basically they were the sports cars, so they were huge prototypes. In these categories, they still had the 917 racing, and in smaller categories, they had this type, but they had to deal, as I say, with the problem coming from the downforce issues that 911 constantly had during their career. It was always an extremely tricky car to race. The model then is based, as I said, on that type of previous R6 that I made that had a very, very long tail, made in fiberglass at the time. This was the years where you cannot get parts in carbon fiber, so it was just fiberglass, wood, and aluminium. It was the stuff that they had to work with, And this was a shortened version. Of course, as you see, is every time that I try to sell parts, I want to provide the item that the average modeler can have problem in making by himself. Is nothing impossible, but as you can see, to create that rear wing there is quite tricky and quite complicated, as you can see. The body is molded in very thin resin. If you see it, my bodies is extremely easy to move them because I don't like to work with bricks, so this is extremely thin plastic. Have a look at here. You see, the model is basically transparent, so you are dealing with something that is I think all the body is 50 grams or something like that. I like to have very, very light part. Of course, I kept a little more. Take another. Meanwhile, I'm making the video and checking my parts, because I would like to have something that is quite reliable, quite straight, and I simply let a little more resin on the parts related to the huge modification of the rear wing here. On the ducktail, it was basically a kind of connection between the ducktail and the rest of the body. And I think it's quite easy to work with them, because when you build up everything, you remember that as in the real car, the part giving the structure to this will be from the windshield and the glasses, and you can take them basically. I also tried on one of these bodies also the old monogram 911 part, and also the monogram 911 part was fitting, I cannot use it in one of my models because it was completely cracked in the middle, so I had to change that part. But it was in a way fitting to those parts, it's quite easy, Sometimes the guy asks me which kind of donor kit do you need to do this stuff, and as soon as together with my kit I start to provide, since the last issue of the 1974 RSR, I provide also the wheels, The wheels are BBS based, I think, and they have the proper tire, will arrive to you little bit scratched because when I prepare the parts, and there is of course the casting point, this is made in solid resin, sorry, not rubber. This because at least I don't have the possibility, that I don't trust so much when they cast resin model and garage kits like this one basically are, with the ordinary rubber that you can make even in a professional casting service, because after a while the rear wheels used to cut and leaking oil, I also had this issue with the oil probably coming from the catalyzation of the rubber. It's anyway a kind of resin, and it was leaking oil, and it became a huge problem because also the decal cannot fit. So I think, despite some models may not like this idea, but then it's up to you, because basically you have to cast by yourself a rim from the 917, and don't use like some modelers. I had a modeler from Japan that asked me, why can't we use the Fujimi RSR Turbo based on the 2.1 RSR of the same era, because it's similar to this one, at least in the fender. But if you look carefully at that mold, maybe in this video we'll add a picture of that model, but it's anyway the latest Fujimi model. It's a delicious model, it was very, very lovely. It have been made in the 70s by Eishi and much more recently by Fujimi, like a brand new kit. But the car is completely different. The tires are similar, but it's much, much bigger. The turbo unit was really performing like a 935, so it was much wider than these big wheels. They were much bigger. These were 13-inch rims, so they were absolutely smaller. And I think this is the proper way to do it. So with these parts, if you take a look at all my social media or my links from my website or my build up of the model, I never had an issue with this part. So I prefer to work with this part of solid resin instead of providing you some rubber and separate rim that constantly can give during the years problems. I mean, many modelers say no, and they do it properly. They take the model right now, because right now there is the production. As you can see, this is part of the production. Of course, I don't make 7 models, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is a quarter of the production that I made right now. So right now the model is available, and my tip is to grab it, of course, at once, because when I make this model, then it will be a very long period if I will cast it again. Remember that from my previous 911 RSR 1974 RSR, it was 11 years since I made the first edition of that. It was the one casted in gray resin, not so bad. Basically the new version is just an improving with different ABC pillar, different roof, different details, and an upgraded level of resin cast that is much more reliable in my opinion. At the time, in that years, I had a different caster, so I could not provide the quality that I provide today about this stuff. So my idea is anyway, if you are interested in this type of historical Porsches, grab it and keep it there, because then you have the model. It's very easy to convert. The only positive stuff that you can have with something like this now, it is that if you grab it now, maybe in the future you have another model of racer like they did, and they did not at the time when I made my first 3.0 RSR 74, there was no donor at all. There was not existing still the 934 from Tamiya and the 934 from Revel. So you just have to deal with the older stuff from Eishi. I suggest like a donor kit at the time, the 934 provided by Eishi and Heller. It was the only donor with the racing interior and a roll cage inside that you can use. But today it's absolutely easy to find something from Tamiya. $40, you have an excellent model, excellent tires. They also feature the BBS, so some version also can use that. This was a specific car, so if you want to do this one, they always race it with this type of rims. But I mean for the other, because this is much more specific, and the kit that I'm going to sell right now, it is provided together with the option of the decal. And I suggest you to take also the decal, of course. The decal are referred to the car number 46, racing at Le Mans, and the other car, I think it was the number 8, racing at the Nürburgring. I probably will go for the car racing at the Nordschleife because I love the track. Been there several times, love the track, love the ambient. For me, is the mecca of the motorsport, even more in Porsche country, So that's it. I think it's absolutely a must if you like this type of model, They can be a little pricey, of course. Racing model never come cheap, but if you understand the type of work that there is in the realization of this type of model, you understand also what are you taking for, And that's it. It's also very, very easy. I mean, sometimes when you find like part like this that are slightly bended, already with the finger they come straight. But this is extremely easy to keep it in the proper position if you need with an air dryer, So the body is really, I do this way of the cast that is extremely hard to do it. Believe me, it is not like the ordinary cast. If you take a Model Factory Hero or a Studio 27, you will see how much thicker they are, the resin, They are much thicker, probably for different purpose, because several times when I was working, for example, in the 90s together with BBR, making the 124 scale model of the SP333, they required to have that type of resin because they are meant to go in the oven like a biscuit, to be cooked together for the catalyzation of the 2K gloss that they used. We don't have that requirement right now because A lot of people make this car, and even more if you're making a car of the 70s, don't go glossy like I do in my model. That is usually for specific requests that I have from my customers, but there is no needing to go so glossy like I did. I made, I think, a very nice model recently that I could not make it completely, you know, because I was missing an air duct, about the Gilles Villeneuve Ferrari 126 C2 in 120 scale coming from Fujimi plus FMD, full detail. And I went too glossy. In my opinion, that model was too glossy. Then a guy that helped me finishing the model, because I could not have a giant issue with that model, I could not finish it, helped me. And they anyway said, and this is a judge in a competition, so I listened to them. Of course, he's a guy that is more skilled than me. Say, Paolo, you go completely right with that. It's okay. The guy that committed to you that model will love it. And it did. And it did. So it was absolutely perfect. But my opinion, it is that those models don't need to go so extremely glossy like the refurbished cars that you see today in the modern event like Goodwood and so on, or Bonham's. This car have been for sale. I think it is right now that they are making the Bonham's auction for this car, and I want to see how much do they close. Of course, it's a replica, it's not the real one. If you look closely at the picture, there is some slightly details, mostly in the rear wing, mostly in that final part, that is not exactly like I did here. It is a little more square there on the corners. You know, there is some minor parts. Also the front end is slightly different, so always check for picture of the period. Probably also here I made some mistake. There was not so much documentation about this vehicle, you know, but I think it is spotted. So this is her. This is the R7 Porsche 911 RSR. If you like it, drop me a mail, info@marcalsoldatino.com, or visit my website alsoldatino.com. I am Paolo, GT40 Model Works. We are the same identical company. So just drop me a mail. The model will be around the usual price that I apply on this model. So if I have something extra, sometimes I place it also over eBay. They become a little more pricey because always there is the commission from eBay that is quite high, you know. And grab it. That is just my tip, you know. If you like this type of model, don't wait for it. Go for it, and I'm nearly sure that you will not regret about this decision. You know. The car is absolutely fantastic. Silver with Martini livery over, badly 70s. And if you see the video of this guy, how they used to drive these monsters, you will fall in love at once with this. So that's it. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next.